The one who seeks validation from others is like a man who builds his home on shifting sand. He does not stand on his own foundation, but instead waits for the opinions of others to grant him a sense of worth. His happiness is not within his control. It is given and taken away by the approval or disapproval of those around him. Such a man is never at peace, for he is always looking outward, never inward, to find his value. He changes himself to fit the desires of others, adjusting his words, actions, and even beliefs based on what he thinks will gain him favor. He becomes a reflection of the expectations of society rather than a true expression of himself. But in doing so, he loses the very thing he is trying to protect: his dignity. A man who molds himself to please everyone pleases no one, least of all himself. The need for validation makes a person vulnerable. If praise lifts his spirit, then criticism crushes it. He becomes a puppet to the world, moved by the strings of admiration and rejection. His emotions rise and fall at the whim of others, and he wonders why he feels exhausted and unstable. But how could it be otherwise when his sense of self is not anchored within? When will I be content? If my sense of self is not anchored within, true strength comes from being indifferent to both praise and blame. The opinions of others, whether kind or cruel, are nothing more than echoes in the wind. They come and go, and they change as quickly as the tides. A wise man does not measure himself by these fleeting voices, but by the unchanging principles that guide his life. If he has done what is right, why should he seek applause? And if he has erred, what good is it to be praised for a mistake? To free oneself from the need for validation, one must turn inward. Instead of asking, "Do they approve of me?" ask, "Do I approve of myself?" Instead of craving admiration, seek self-respect. The highest form of confidence is to act rightly and remain unmoved, whether others recognize it or not. A man who knows his worth does not beg the world to confirm it. The moment one stops chasing validation is the moment one becomes truly free. No longer weighed down by the fear of rejection or the hunger for praise, one can walk with quiet assurance. Like a tree deeply rooted in the earth, he stands firm against the winds of opinion. He does not bend to please, nor does he fall at the first sign of disapproval. In this, he finds peace. Criticism is an inevitable part of life, yet many allow it to wound them deeply, as if their worth depends on the approval of others. A man who overreacts to criticism reveals his insecurity, for he grants too much power to the words of another. He flinches at the slightest disapproval, taking it as a personal attack rather than a mere opinion. This is the behavior of one who has not yet mastered himself, who still seeks external validation to confirm his own value. When a person allows criticism to disturb his peace, he exposes a mind that is untrained in self-sufficiency. He reacts not with reason, but with emotion, feeling either insulted or discouraged. Yet, what is criticism but the perspective of another? And why should another's perspective hold more weight than one's own understanding? The wise do not suffer over the words of others. They evaluate them, discard what is useless, and take what is useful without resentment. A man who is easily shaken by criticism spends his life in defense, always justifying, always explaining, as if he must prove himself to all who speak against him. But what does he gain from this? His energy is wasted on convincing others rather than improving himself. He fights unnecessary battles, exhausting himself in a war that does not need to be fought. In contrast, the man who is indifferent to criticism remains calm, for he knows that neither praise nor blame changes the truth of who he is. Criticism, if taken wisely, can be a teacher rather than a tormentor. If a rebuke is just, it should be accepted with gratitude, for it reveals a flaw that can be corrected. If it is unjust, it should be ignored, for it holds no truth. Either way, there is no reason to be disturbed. The mind that is strong welcomes correction and remains unmoved by insult. Such a man gains from every word spoken against him, turning even the harshest critique into wisdom. The key to overcoming the fear of criticism is self-assurance. When a man is firm in his principles, he does not seek approval nor fear disapproval. He understands that the opinions of others are beyond his control, and that his true task is only to act with virtue. Whether he is praised or condemned, he remains the same, guided by his own judgment, rather than the shifting voices of the crowd. To react strongly to every criticism is to live in constant turmoil, but to receive it with calmness and clarity is to possess true strength. The one who stands firm, who neither crumbles under judgment nor burns with anger at insult, is the one who is truly free. In this freedom there is peace. In this peace there is power. A man who constantly speaks about himself is like a cup that overflows, spilling its contents without regard for those around him. He believes that by sharing his achievements, his struggles, and his thoughts endlessly, he will earn admiration. Yet in doing so, he reveals not confidence, but insecurity. For the truly assured man does not need to remind others of his worth. His actions and presence speak for themselves. There is a kind of desperation in excessive self-disclosure. It is as if the one speaking seeks reassurance, hoping that in recounting his deeds others will confirm his value, but this need to be acknowledged only weakens him. The more he talks, the more he exposes his dependence on external approval. The wise man does not measure his worth by how much he is heard, but by the strength of his character, which needs no advertisement. The inability to remain silent stems from discomfort with oneself. Those who constantly turn conversations toward their own experiences are often afraid of being unseen or unheard. They do not realize that true presence requires no announcement. A mountain does not declare its height, yet all who pass by recognize its majesty. A man who is secure in himself does not demand attention. His quiet confidence draws others naturally. Hitler. When one speaks too much about oneself, he misses the opportunity to listen and learn. Every conversation becomes a monologue rather than an exchange. Yet wisdom is gained not in speaking, but in hearing what others have to say. A man who listens carefully gains insight, while the one who talks endlessly only hears his own voice. In silence, knowledge grows. In self-absorption, it is lost. Restraint in speech is a sign of mastery. To speak only when necessary, to share only what adds value, and to leave space for others. This is the way of the wise. A well-placed word carries more weight than 1,000 spoken for vanity. The one who speaks little but meaningfully will be remembered far longer than the one who speaks much but says little. To break free from the habit of speaking too much about oneself, one must cultivate inner stillness. Instead of seeking validation through words, one should find contentment in simply being. Let actions reveal character rather than words demand recognition. In the end, it is not the loudest voice that commands respect, but the quiet presence of a man who does not need to prove himself at all. Silence is a mirror, reflecting the state of one's mind. Yet many fear it, rushing to fill every pause in conversation as if silence itself is a failure. They mistake emptiness for discomfort, assuming that words must always occupy the space between people. But this fear of silence does not come from strength, it comes from insecurity. A man at ease with himself is at ease with silence, for he does not need to prove his presence with noise. Those who fear silence often believe that a conversation must be kept alive at all costs, even if the words spoken hold no meaning. They search frantically for topics, filling the air with unnecessary chatter, not realizing that forced words weaken the weight of speech. The need to constantly talk betrays a restless mind, one that finds no peace in stillness. But silence is not an enemy, it is a space where thoughts settle, where meaning deepens. A man uncomfortable with silence is often uncomfortable with himself. He fills the gaps in conversation not for the sake of others, but to avoid facing his own thoughts. He fears what might emerge in quiet moments, so he drowns them with words. But to be truly at ease with others, one must first be at ease with oneself. A secure man does not fear silence, for he is not running from anything within. In conversation, Silence has a purpose. It allows words to be absorbed, gives time for reflection, and strengthens what has already been said. A moment of quiet does not weaken a discussion. It gives it power. The greatest wisdom is often found in pauses, for it is in those spaces that understanding grows. The wise do not rush to fill every void. They allow silence to speak when words are not needed. A man who embraces silence commands respect. He does not speak simply to be heard, but speaks when there is something worth saying. His words carry more weight because they are chosen, not forced. People listen more carefully to the one who does not speak needlessly, for they know that when he does speak, his words will matter. In contrast, the one who fears silence fills the air with words that are soon forgotten. To overcome the fear of silence, one must learn to sit with it, to welcome it as a friend rather than an intruder. In silence, there is confidence. In silence, there is presence. Let conversations breathe, let thoughts settle, and let meaning rise from the quiet. The strongest man in the room is often the one who does not feel the need to speak at all. Apology is a virtue when given rightly, but when offered too often and without cause, it becomes a sign of weakness. A man who over-apologizes seeks permission to exist, as if his presence, his words, and his actions are an inconvenience to others. He believes he must constantly justify himself, but in doing so, he undermines his own worth. True confidence does not beg for acceptance. It stands firm in the knowledge that respect is not something to be pleaded for, but something to be embodied. The habit of over-apologizing often stems from a fear of disapproval. The one who constantly says sorry hopes to avoid conflict, to smooth every interaction, to ensure that no one ever takes offense. But this endless self-correction does not earn respect. It diminishes it. When a man apologizes for things that require no apology, he teaches others to see him as lesser, as someone who must ask permission to take up space. This is a man who over-apologizes often confuses politeness with submission. There is no harm in acknowledging a mistake, no shame in making amends when one has done wrong, but to apologize for speaking, for having an opinion, for existing as oneself, this is an act of self-erasure. A person who constantly apologizes is not being courteous. He is making himself small, and in doing so, he invites the world to treat him as unimportant. Apologies carry weight only when they are used with intention. When given for true missteps, they show character and integrity. But when scattered carelessly over every interaction, they lose their meaning. A man who apologizes sparingly, only when necessary, is taken seriously. His words have value because they are not given out of fear, but out of principle. The one who apologizes at every turn, however, is dismissed, his words seen as mere habit rather than sincerity. Strength is not found in unnecessary apologies, but in rightful conviction. To move through the world with quiet confidence is to know when to take responsibility and when to stand firm. There will always be those who disapprove, those who misunderstand, those who take offense where none was intended. But a strong man does not live in constant worry of this. He speaks with purpose, acts with integrity, and apologizes only when his conscience, not his insecurity, demands it. To break free from the trap of over-apologizing, one must first recognize their own worth. There is no need to apologize for taking up space, for existing as one is, for having thoughts and opinions. Let words be measured, let actions be deliberate, and let apologies be rare but meaningful. Respect is not won by submission, but by self-assurance. And the world does not admire the man who begs to be accepted. It admires the one who knows he does not need to. The pursuit of status and recognition is a trap that enslaves the mind. A man who chases prestige believes that his worth is determined by how others see him, not by who he truly is. He is not free, for his happiness is tied to the approval of the world. He does not act from inner conviction, but from a desire to be admired. Yet admiration is fleeting, and those who seek it are never satisfied, always needing more to feel complete. A man consumed by the need for recognition loses himself in comparison. He measures his success not by his own principles, but by the standards set by others. He looks at those with more wealth, more influence, more admiration, and feels inadequate. No matter what he achieves, there is always someone ahead of him. His victories bring only temporary relief before the hunger returns. The more he chases, the more restless he becomes. The pursuit of status is a never-ending race, one in which there is no true winner. A man may climb to great heights, earning the praise of many, but if his sense of worth depends on that praise, he remains a prisoner. The moment admiration fades, he is left with nothing. True confidence does not come from external validation, but from an inner foundation that cannot be shaken by the opinions of others. A person ruled by the desire for recognition sacrifices peace for appearances. He carefully curates his image, ensuring that he is seen in the best light. He fears failure not because of its consequences, but because of how it will look to others. He is not truly living for himself, but performing for an audience. And in the end, the audience does not matter, for their approval is fickle, changing as quickly as the wind. The wise man does not seek status, nor does he reject it if it comes naturally. He understands that titles, praise, and admiration are not the source of true fulfillment. He focuses instead on being virtuous, on doing what is right regardless of who notices. He is content with his actions, not with how they are perceived. If recognition comes, he remains the same. If it does not, he remains the same. His worth is not dictated by the world, but by his own character. To free oneself from the pursuit of status, one must first realize that external validation is an illusion. It offers no lasting satisfaction, only an endless craving for more. The only recognition worth having is that which comes from within, a quiet, unshakable knowledge that one has lived with integrity. Let others chase titles and applause. The truly strong man walks his path undisturbed, needing no audience to confirm his value.